What an extraordinary, remarkable, insert your superlative here. Evening it was, late afternoon at the White House, with the sight of so many European leaders descending upon Washington, D.C. to protect almost bodyguard-like, phalanx-like Vladimir Zelenskyy, to try and ensure that there was no repeat of the bust-up, the showdown in the Oval Office that we saw back in February. Was it a success or not? I'll share my thoughts with you on that in a second. What we can say is that there is already further movement this morning. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is going to chair a virtual meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, his phrase, this morning to update leaders on the outcome of what discussions in Washington yesterday. That's the coalition, a group of nations essentially, including the UK, France, Germany, that have pledged to protect peace, to act as a guarantor of peace in Ukraine when and if it is achieved. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying the meeting will discuss those security guarantees which were proffered, hinted at, insinuated by Donald Trump yesterday. More on that in a second. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk will also attend. Meanwhile, the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev posted his disdain for the group on social media this morning. The anti-Russian warmongering Coalition of the Willing failed to outplay at POTUS on his turf, he wrote on X. And that, I think, embodies exactly where we're at this morning, which is a 6-month-long fight, battle for Trump's ear, for his perception. That is what everything yesterday was about. When you saw European leader after European leader kiss the ring of Donald Trump, get to bow down in front of him, be obsequious even towards him, it was about inhabiting the universe of Trump. When they said things about how brilliant the trade deal was with the EU, about how much closer he's brought Europe to peace than has been the case for 3.5 years. It is not because they believe any of this stuff, essentially. Most of them will have little time for Trump. It is all about trying to court his heart and soul and trying to convince him as to which side is the true impediment to peace and the path to the Nobel Peace Prize he so desperately craves. That was what Vladimir Putin was doing in Alaska on Friday. That is what Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz, Emmanuel Macron, Ursula von der Leyen and others were doing in Washington yesterday. Russia, for its part, has shown what an impediment to peace it is just overnight, despite those talks in the White House on Monday. Ukrainian officials reporting fresh attacks launched by Russia overnight. Overnight, Ukraine's foreign minister, Andrei Sybiha, had posted on X this morning, overnight, Russia launched 270 drones, as well as ballistic and cruise missiles into Ukraine. There's been damage to the energy infrastructure and injured civilians. This once again demonstrates how critical it is to end the killing, achieve a lasting peace, and ensure robust security guarantees. So where are we after last night? Well, as always with these things, there's a positive and negative side of the ledger. This is my brief assessment as to where we are. Positives. Trump was charmed by Zelenskyy by comparison to last time. The suit gambit clearly worked well. Zelenskyy handled that adroitly and with some aplomb. It wasn't worse than last time. It was much better. That said, that is a low bar. Pretty much the only way it could have been worse than last time if they'd ended up in a fist fight with each other, but clearly it went much better. The Western leaders played Trump well. They appealed to his vanity. They appealed to his ego, which is pretty much the only thing they could do in this situation. The ball is back in Putin's court to some extent. He has now got to decide whether to have a bilateral meeting with Zelenskyy, something he has been very reluctant to do. Because he has described Zelenskyy as a Nazi and described him as an illegitimate leader, all of these lies and nonsense and mendacity. So that is something he will now be under some pressure to do, although I suspect he will just try and kick it into the long grass. Trump clearly wants a deal. I mean, you used to think of Trump as an isolationist. He's not acting like an isolationist now, far from it. He's putting himself at the centre of the global order. He wants, for whatever reason, I think some noble reasons, I think he genuinely does want to stop the killing. I think it horrifies him when he sees it on cable news, which he watches a lot of. He clearly is desperate for a Nobel Peace Prize, more prosaically and more selfishly, but nonetheless, he clearly wants something. He's not a disinterested party in this or an uninterested party. He wants something to come out of it, which the European leaders are trying to clearly play with. That's all positive. On the negative side, these security guarantees which have been hinted at, they are highly nebulous. It struck me yesterday, it felt to me yesterday that what the Europeans were doing their best to do was to talk up whatever meagre security guarantees Trump has hinted at without being completely sure as to what they mean or what Trump will actually do, and they're trying to bounce him slightly, which could backfire. Trump is still clearly enamoured with Putin. He trusts him when he shouldn't. He buys into Putin's origin story of the war, which is a bad thing. The new sanctions, which were hinted at only a week ago, they're gone. They're not on the table anymore, it appears. And he's no longer interested in a ceasefire. Again, a Putin objective. So there were some positives, there were some negatives. And although Keir Starmer is talking about, and Emmanuel Macron, some big breakthrough, to me, what they basically agreed to do yesterday is to keep talking. That means everything's still on the table, but relatively little was achieved. There is still this big question, of course, as to whether there will be boots on the ground, something the Russians have rejected the idea of. I want to talk to you this morning about what you think was achieved at that meeting yesterday, whether you think Trump is a peacemaker after all, and indeed whether, in theory, you would at least be willing to consider the idea of sending British troops to Ukraine.